Well, my name's Paul Athans. I live in Marple. I walked here today, very handy. And I think the main thing that I want to get across is I'm not a career politician. I've spent my working career in the British Army, in the Duke of Lancaster's Regiment, which is the local regiment. And actually, it means that unlike some politicians who come out and focus on promising I'm going to deliver this, that, and the other, for me, it's more about values, and it's what are the values that are important to me, what are the values that are important to others. I think the things that I was most proud of during my military career, it wasn't operational tours, Afghanistan, Iraq. It was helping people. It was building a refugee camp overseas. It was deploying troops on COVID support forces. Or it was just literally helping soldiers with issues that are facing them, whether it was issues with mental health, which you can have quite a large amount in the army, or it was gambling addictions, problems with alcohol, those sort of things. It was those things that really drove me to serve. And equally, it means that as an MP, I don't know of any other career or job where you have the opportunity, now not every MP takes it, but the opportunity to help as many people as you can as an MP. And so the things I stand up for are the Army's core values, and it's integrity, it's loyalty, it's selfless commitment, it's respect for the others, and they're the things that I want to bring here. And Hazel Grove is a fantastic part of the world, it really is. But there's always more that can be done. I want to invest in Stepping Hill. I'm a northerner who genuinely believes in levelling up the north, and I really want to fight for our fair share of investment in the area. I think tackling crime is very important, and also actually focusing the tackling of crime on the issues that are most important to the people in the area. I think having a good dialogue with the police is essential as an MP. And for me, on the 5th of July, it's going to be a choice of who's going to be the Prime Minister, right? At a national level, it is a choice of will it be Keir Starmer or will it be Rishi Sunak? And what I want people to think of when they're voting in Hazel Grove is not just do you want a good local MP who's going to stand up for you, but actually who do you want in the government? And that is a choice between Labour and the Conservatives. And I do fear for some of what Labour's not telling you in their manifesto in terms of tax rises and the impact that can have on working people. You know what you're getting with the Conservative manifesto. And so given that Hazel Grove is quickly becoming a three-way marginal, for me, I think the best way to sort of limit any risk of a supermajority for Keir Starmer is by voting local and voting for me on the 4th of July. That's a really good question, Christine. And I think the first thing to say is something that Christine's identified herself on is the COVID impact. I meet regularly with teams at Stepping Hill, and I met with the chief executive probably about a month ago now. And there was a 40% increase in cancer referrals after COVID at the hospital. And now most of that were people doing the right thing at the time. It was someone with a dodgy looking mole who said, actually, don't want to put pressure on the NHS. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stay back. And then when they then did report and say, I think I've got a problem, it was skin cancer. And so the treatment is longer, it is more complicated and requires things. And that is a significant issue that's exacerbated there. Now as a government, the government have invested record amounts into the NHS. They have recruited a record amount of doctors and nurses, but we want to go further. And I think the commitment is, and definitely fact check me after this, but I think it's 92,000 nurses and 28,000 doctors is over the course of the next parliament is our target for recruiting extra people into the NHS. But it's more than that. It's also reforming how it works. So our rollout of Pharmacy First, for example, the idea behind that is if there is a simple condition that doesn't necessarily require a GP to issue antibiotics, well, we're going to allow a pharmacist to do that, to try and encourage people to go to their pharmacy first, rather than trouble a GP. And that the idea behind that is to bring down GP waiting times, which in turn hopefully would bring down hospital waiting times because people are not going to hospital because they don't think they can get GP, etc., etc., etc. So that, locally in Stepping Hill, I mean, there is some really positive things about Stepping Hill, and there are some issues at Stepping Hill, and I'm in no way sort of going to hide behind that. The staff there are fantastic at Stepping Hill, and their staff satisfaction surveys recently have been outstanding. They're doing a really, really good job. the Stockport NHS Trust own the estate, so unlike certain other areas, they're not paying any ground rent, they're not paying anything else, and the building is all of the estate is also owned by them. The main issue they have is the estate is tired, and they don't have really any space to build new treatment areas because half the estate is flat car parking. So for me, one of the first things to do, and it sounds like a simple thing, but if we can get a multi-storey car park built at Stepping Hill, if we can fix the parking problem, you can repurpose some of the flat level car parks into new buildings, new treatment areas. And that is something that I want to focus on, because there has been talk of moving health provision outside our area, and I'm completely opposed to that. And rest assured, the future of Stepping Hill will be secure if I was elected as the MP on the 4th of July. Well, again, another good question, Hannah. So I'll break that into two parts. The Conservative government did introduce things like Help to Buy in the past and stamp duty relief for first-time buyers. We've committed to implementing that again in our manifesto this time around. And so we will remove stamp duty for first-time buyers up to houses of £425,000 if elected. And equally, we are looking at reintroducing Help to Buy scheme. And one of the things on that is basically reduce the size of the deposit required for you to be able to get a mortgage, and the government will step in to support you to be able to do that, and also have a really long term before you start paying any interest or repaying that loan. And so they're two practical things that we're going to do. There is still a supply versus demand issue, and we do need more houses. Now, the Conservative government has built 2.5 million houses since 2010, and I think it's 1 million over the course of the last Parliament, but there is still more to do. And what I mean, focusing specifically on Marple, what I don't support is what the Labour Party propose, which is in essence to just build over the greenbelt, right? Plonking 4,000 houses in the middle of a field with no infrastructure is not the way to sort the problem. We are in a position in Greater Manchester where actually there's huge opportunity for building on brownfield sites. So the Battersby Hat Factory, as a prime example, is a great example of where brownfield sites have been repurposed and done. I think Compstall Mill, which is, I mean, it caught fire in February. It's complete rack and ruin. You know, you could use that to build a whole set of houses and flats on there, and equally you can maintain the heritage of this place by building a small, monument or memorial or model of what the mill used to look like, leaving it at the side, and then you can still have the history there, but you can repurpose that. And there's examples like that across Greater Manchester. One of the things the government is looking to introduce is giving extra sort of tax relief and support to companies who want to do sometimes brownfield sites need, and I can't think of the terminology, but essentially like cleansing or cleaning or whatever the terminology is. What we want to do is give them either tax relief or financial support to allow them to do that, decrease the regulation on them, so we can get into those brownfield sites as soon as possible. And if we can increase the supply of housing and support first-time buyers like Hannah, that will help to get them onto the housing ladder. That is a really good question, and I know the site in Bredbury in principle, and I know that the community feeling there is a bit torn. So there are some who are very opposed because it is taking out a chunk of the greenbelt, which I completely understand. There are also some who are sort of suggesting that if the developer can build a second road into the sports facility, actually they'd be relatively content with that because of the extra support for the community that would bring. So what I want to do is listen to local people specifically about that project there. In principle, I don't want to build on the green belt, and we should look to expand our commercial areas in pre-existing commercial areas. I think the brownfield first policy is absolutely right. And if I take Compstall Mill as an example, it's not an area where there's a large industrial base around it. If someone said, I don't know, went to TW Bowler and said, we're going to buy your land, build some houses on there in the middle of an industrial estate, well, it isn't really logical. So there's definitely a reality of how that goes. But in principle, what I know, there was a community meeting last week. I know one of our members went along to it and was feeding reports back from it. I want to see what the local feeling is there. In principle, I oppose it, but if the entirety of the community says they support it, then I'm willing to be swayed. One of the things about me is I'm a very pragmatic politician. I think, too often the media paint politics as black or white, and actually there's many shades of grey. And so and what you have to do is hear what matters to local people and take the local people's views into account. Yes, again, a really, really good question. I'll split that into two parts, and I'll sort of go. So that incident, I remember seeing that on Facebook, the videos from people with inside Sainsbury's. I mean, it was absolutely horrendous. And I meet periodically with superintendent of neighbourhood policing within Stockport, and when I met him in November last year, it's changed now, but whoever it was then, I flagged that as a incident in particular. There's a couple of facets to this. One of the facets is the fact that policing is devolved. It is run by Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester. That is one aspect of it, and has his focus been on crime? I would argue not. Especially GMP did go into special measures during his tenure. I think GMP are doing a lot more. And what is good is when police forces can learn from adjacent police forces. So I think it was Cheshire Constabulary that basically put together like a vehicle task force, tackling specifically the vehicle theft, because it is something that Hazel Grove in particular, the ward of Hazel Grove, not just the constituency, suffers because of its proximity to motorways and A roads. And so you can steal a car and be gone relatively quickly. Actually trying to drive out of Marple in traffic is a nightmare to begin with. So, you can see why those sort of areas are targeted. So, absolutely, there is something to be done with that, and it is a police responsibility to do it. That should not be happening. I know they put together a task force specifically targeting that, and whilst I was allowed to know a little bit of the operational side of it, I'm not going to go into the operational activity of what the police are doing, but rest assured they have switched their focus onto that. The second aspect of that question is something that is very close to my heart, and in fact, in the newspapers today, Stockport Nub News ran an article that I sent a press release to them to talk about. It was specifically about that issue. And last year I was stood talking to someone outside Marple train station discussing transport when a guy on a motorbike wheelied himself down Brabham's Brow right past me and managed to get a picture of the two, just pointed at him as he's passing past us. Now that is not just a danger to themselves, it is a danger to others. And I've been driving through this constituency with someone literally trying to overtake me on one wheel behind me, and they are a real danger. And I had this discussion with the police. One of the issues they have is their ability to sort of engage someone driving recklessly on a motorbike is very different as it would be if were fleeing a scene of a crime. So if someone's just robbed a bank and is escaping on a motorbike, the ability for the police to stop that motorbike, they have more rules of engagement than they do if someone's just driving recklessly. So that is one part of the problem. And I think one of the things that we've proposed will go towards supporting that. So GMP have identified a problem. I've lobbied them hard to do something about it, and they are looking at doing it. One of the issues they felt was that not enough people were reporting when they were seeing them doing something in the middle, but not enough for people reporting them arriving or leaving their sort of base location. Now, one of the things we've proposed in the manifesto is next to 8,000 police officers. So we introduced 20,000 more police officers across the UK, 1,218 in Greater Manchester. But we've now said, actually, we want 8,000 more. And the figure of 8,000 is based on one police officer per ward. So that 8,000 is going to go on neighbourhood policing. So what I can't say is the exact slice of that 8,000 cake that Greater Manchester and Hazel Grove is going to get. But what I would be fighting for under a Conservative government is to make sure that we had a neighbourhood police officer per ward. And I've gone around with the police on their local patrols, and the neighbourhood team do a fantastic job. But if they are covering the entirety of Marple and High Lane and Marple Bridge, well, actually having two people doing that might be more beneficial. And the police officers who've been doing those routes for a long time build up the trust in the community, build up the links in the community. That means people are more inclined to see them and go, "Oh, all right, mate, how's it going?" and report those things. And that is, so there is the the actual task force side of policing, but also there's the neighbourhood policing, and that's something that I really support, and actually the Conservative Manifesto supports as well. Oh, that's that's an interesting question. Well, from a electoral perspective, I am reasonably confident that you can only accept a donation from someone who is on the electoral register. So I think for a parliamentary to support my campaign or anything like that, the answer has to be no, because they can't they can't do it. I I wouldn't say that, I came from a military background rather than a background in business and finance, so I don't have a vast sum of rich friends sat in overseas places that would suddenly flood me with money. So I think that's a relatively easy one for me to say no to. And equally, it's a good opportunity to talk about some foreign policy issues, especially. And there is the world has probably not been this unstable or unsafe as it has since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of communism and the end of the Cold War. And there is a war on the continent, and I went to Ukraine in 2019. I supported deploying people to Ukraine as part whilst in the army, and I had the honour of visiting some of the British troops delivering training to Ukrainians. Right now, well, it was last year, but supporting them. And I think we're doing a fantastic job supporting Ukraine, but it really does bring home the threats that are faced, especially from Russia and also China. And those threats are not just the physical threats of a war in Ukraine. There is also the threats in terms of cyber and in terms of attacks there. And I think putting security front and centre is something that I personally very, very, very passionate about, because it is protecting our infrastructure here, protecting our digital as well as physical infrastructure here is going to be essential, as there's the potential for more hostile actors to be more aggressive as we move forward. Well, absolutely. I think I will definitely be putting a lot of pressure on Andy Burnham to do a lot about crime. I think the grooming gangs are, in particular, a absolute disgrace. What went on in Rochdale is abhorrent, and absolutely more needs to be done. On county lines, I think it is something that I personally have a slight issue with, which is the devolved nature of some elements of policing. That's why the county line gangs can come across. And I think the work that has been done, especially by James Cleverly as the Home Secretary, to sort of try to remove those arbitrary lines between police forces and have more connectivity, I think is absolutely the way forward. But to answer the question simply, yes, I absolutely will. Yeah, good question, Jay. I mean, climate change is. I absolutely believe climate change is real, and I absolutely believe we need to do something about it. I think the Conservatives' pragmatic approach to net zero is the appropriate way forward. And you only have to look at, if we take ULEZ as a prime example, that is, for me, a tax on working people, especially working class people. If you do go to central London, you see a lot of Lamborghinis. You don't see a lot of white van men anymore. And so that is something that I feel like that is a well-intentioned thing, is actually a tax on working people and a tax on people who want to own a car. That is unacceptable. And so the war on motorists that Labour particularly followed, I don't support. In terms of getting to net zero, and there will be those who don't believe in climate change. Now, I do, and I will happily sit down and try and to have a discussion with anyone and say that, no, I do believe it's real. But I think everyone can agree that energy security is something that is close to the heart of everyone. And what we did see when Russia invaded Ukraine was the energy price spike across, especially across the world, but also across the globe. Now, some countries were better placed to deal with that. I think we've moved from 7% to 50% coming from renewables since Labour in power in 2010, which is a fantastic achievement, but equally bills still did rise because we are still reliant on oil and gas from other areas. And that's why the So the Labour policy of like not starting any new oil or gas mining in the North Sea, I don't think is practical or realistic. I also don't understand the Green policy and Green Party's policy of opposing nuclear power. I think nuclear power is fantastic. And unfortunately, when we were elected in 2010 on a policy of build nuclear power plants, it was the Liberal Democrats who, part of the coalition agreement, was no, we can't build any more. And actually, I think prices would not have risen as much as they did during the energy shock if we'd have been more reliant on British energy and our own production of energy. And the government did do a lot. It protected, it paid half energy bills for a lot of people, and sort of that energy bill support that we invested was absolutely needed. But equally, we need to produce more of our own energy. And for me, that is a mix of renewable and that is a mix of nuclear to get us in that position. And what our plans are for net zero is get us there in a pragmatic way, but also get us to the point where we're a net energy exporter rather than net energy importer. And that way, we can control our energy prices or protect ourselves from energy price shocks much better. Germany, because of against the coalition of the Green Party that time, closed their last nuclear power plant in May 2022, which happens to be the exact same month that Russia invaded Ukraine. And so Germany was in this absolute catastrophic moment in terms of their energy costs because they'd closed their last nuclear power plant. And so I categorically do not want us to end up in that position again in the future. Oh, that's I've not been asked that question. I've done a couple of hustings now, and I've been on the doorstep or not, and no one's asked me that question. But I do like that question. Well, I'm going to focus it slightly into our defence industry, because I think one of the things that this government has been very, very good at is prioritising rearming and protecting, especially the British Army. If we go back to Iraq in 2003, I think it was utterly unforgivable that the Labour Party sent British troops into Iraq in unarmoured Land Rovers. And we have, as a government, focused on making sure that the army is more lethal and more deployable, and part of that has been in improving our procurement cycles. And that in itself has changed in how it was 20 years ago. We went through a period during Afghanistan and Iraq where things called urgent operational requirements happened, where we bought off-the-shelf things, often from overseas, often from the US, to fill a capability gap, because again, we were sent to war by a Labour Party that didn't provide us the kit and equipment we needed. What this government done is actually it's when it has taken contracts out, it's made sure that it's built in Britain. And a prime example of that, close to home, is the Boxer armoured vehicle. It was a German designed vehicle. We said we would buy this vehicle, we would build them, but they had to be built in Britain. And so 50% of all those vehicles being built in Stockport. And Stockport is the company that's doing it, and I don't know whether I can name it or not, so I'm not going to, but the company, they're near the McVitie's factory if that helps, the company that is making it is manufacturing basically the hull of the vehicle. The other bit, the main bit of the vehicle, is being manufactured in Telford. There's then sending 50% of them one way to swap to the other, and then they're constructing the vehicles on site. That has meant that that company has hired more people. It's focused on hiring veterans. It's also expanded their facility, built a new warehouse next door. That is fantastic, and that is something that we need to be doing more of, investing in British industry. And I think too often in the past we bought a piece of military equipment and said, we've got that now, okay, we're going to forget about that construction firm, that British industry, and then we allowed it to fold. Equally, there's been a huge amount of investment, especially in levelling up in terms of free ports. And what you have seen in Teesside in particular is a huge expansion and sort of reaffirmation of British industry there, but there's still more to go. And equally, I think what we're doing in the education sector is also playing into that. So gone are the Blair years of academia is the be all and end all. Our focus on apprenticeships has been really, really good. And since 2010, it's around 9,700 apprenticeships have been created here in Hazel constituency, and that's fantastic. And we've committed to 100,000 more. And equally, the introduction of T levels means we're focusing people who don't necessarily want to go down the academic route or want to go down the skills route, and actually that skills route can lead to supporting and advancing British industry. An interesting idea. I not something that I've ever thought about. I mean, if you join the army, if you join any part of the military, you sign up for a minimum period of service for the army. It's 4 years. For those in the RAF who are going to be pilots and things like that, their return of service is called is often longer because the training burden is longer. I don't think it's in our manifesto. I've read my manifesto. I don't remember don't remember reading it. It would absolutely be something I'd look into. I think in principle, I don't necessarily oppose the idea, but I'd want to know more about it. Is there? I mean, a doctor friend of mine qualified, did probably a year in the UK, then went to New Zealand, spent a year in New Zealand, but then returned and actually brought a wealth of knowledge back. So I think in principle, I really like the idea, but I'd want to consult experts in the area, take some advice before I went for definite. If you know what I mean. Yeah, a very difficult question for some people to answer. Um, the Middle East is full of conflict, and Israel Gaza is the most obvious one. But there is still a lot of conflict going on in the Middle East. I served in Afghanistan. I served in Iraq. There is still a civil war raging in Syria. There is conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh. There is the Houthi rebels in Yemen. There's Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's the constant threat of Iran, and Iran is providing weapons to pretty much all of the above, and also potentially to Russia as well. There's a plethora of problems over there, specifically on the Israel-Palestine issue, and I've been to both Israel and Palestine in my time. The government stance has been hostages out, aid in, and I will absolutely pay tribute to armed forces and the work that they've been doing, getting airdrops and getting aid into Gaza. There are the two innocent bodies in this are the Israeli hostages who were taken prisoner on. Well, no, sorry, taken hostage on the 7th of October, and it's they need to be released at the earliest possible opportunity, and also the innocent children, the innocent people of Gaza who are caught up between a terrorist organisation who is putting them in harm's way, and also the Israeli army who is trying to free those hostages. I think too often this debate has become politicised. There is a UN Security Council backed ceasefire proposal on the table, and I absolutely support that. We do need a ceasefire there, and I urge both parties to come to the table to do that. I would also say that what has been most concerning from a UK side is the impact of the rise in anti-Semitism in particular, and the rise in violence and attacks on democracy that have resulted. There are some of the reports from the Rochdale by-election, for example, when violence and intimidation are used, that is categorically unacceptable. Whatever your views on the Israel-Gaza issue, bringing physical or threatening behaviour into politics is wholly unacceptable. And given that I think it was 3 days ago that it was the 8-year anniversary of Joe Cox's death, and also in this parliament we had the sad death of Sir David Amess, I completely sign up to the Joe Cox pledge of sort of fairness and decency in politics, and we should not be in a position where people are afraid to do things like this because of that threat of violence and intimidation. But that was a very long-winded answer to the question, which is there is a UN Security Council ceasefire deal on the table, and both parties need to sign up to it as soon as possible. Yes. Yes. Maybe. 100% yes. 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 No. Yes. Absolutely. It depends on the scandals. Maybe. Well, there is an ongoing police investigation, so I'm not going to reference that particular thing. It's the use of the word scandal. So if I, as an MP, was found to have broke the Nolan principles of public life, if I, as an MP, crossed the floor as a sitting MP and joined a different party, if I, as an MP, was found guilty of a significant crime or a crime, then yes, if I was handed a speeding penalty, would I, which could be a scandal, would I resign? No, but yeah, I think if you're elected as a Conservative and halfway through Parliament you decide to become a Labour MP, you should have a by-election. If you are found guilty of taking bribes, absolutely should resign. Now, I'm not expecting to do any of those things, and I hope I never will. One of the 6 core values of the British Army is integrity, and that is something that I absolutely want to bring and uphold to British politics and our area. Whatever your political persuasion, you should have an MP that has integrity, and that is absolutely me. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I would guess it was the little tunnel underneath the canal bridge about 400 metres from where I live, at top of El Nowhere Road. Well, I think credibility and trust is an issue, not just for the Conservative Party, but for all parties. Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party and is now expelled for anti-Semitism. It's not just something that is unique to the Conservative Party. And what I think is unfortunate, I've knocked on a lot of doors, and I regularly bring up this same name, and no one ever knows who they are. And it's Andrew Merson. He's the MP for South West Wiltshire. He was the Minister for Defence, People and Families. He's 63. He was a Royal Naval Surgeon, continues as a Royal Naval Reservist. And there's a reason that you've never heard of him, because he's just good at his job. He doesn't set the world on fire and set the world alight, but equally he doesn't rock the boat. And unfortunately, it is the rump of people, and I will use Lee Anderson as a prime example of someone who was kicked out of our party. It is them who make the news, unfortunately, and that does drag politics down for all of us. And I think the credibility and trust factor is something that is really important in politics, and the only way to bring it back is to demonstrate that credibility and trust. I mean, I've sort of touched on them before, but 6 core values in the British Army, integrity is one of them, and has always been seen as the most important one. And I believe that politicians need to own the decisions, right or wrong. But I think honesty, most people appreciate it. And when a politician does mess up in a human way, coming out and apologising, I think is actually often quite a brave thing to do, and something that should be championed. And so I think it's a bit of give and take. In terms of electorally, my focus is making sure that people see me as someone who is standing as a candidate with integrity. I didn't join the Conservative Party specifically to get electoral success. I'm not a glory hunter. I joined the Conservative Party because I believe in the values of the Conservative Party. I believe in aspiration. That is for me the core of what the Conservative Party is. And so I'm standing for the Conservative Party, but also I am an individual. I have my own views, and for me, integrity is absolutely up there. I know the Marple Neighbourhood Plan. I deliberately did not express opinion on the Marple Neighbourhood Plan. I voted in the Marple Neighbourhood Plan referendum. I was disappointed with the incredibly low turnout, but that's sort of to be expected there. Ultimately, do I support the idea of local people wanting to get involved in decisions that matter in their area? Absolutely. And whether, regardless of my exact thoughts on the plan, the fact is we've voted for something that is going to allow local people to have a voice in the area, and that's democracy. That's a good thing. Really good question. I'll start with the apprenticeship side. So we're already doing lots of apprenticeships, and I was at Marple Sixth Form yesterday, who is a college that does A levels as well as T levels, and I think our move towards technical levels and on parity to A levels is really good. Our idea behind the Advanced British Standard is sort of combining those two together and trying to remove the arbitrary divide between academic and technical qualifications and skills-based qualifications. And I think the extra 100,000 apprenticeships is really good, and everyone I speak to in further education absolutely agrees with that. There is more that I personally would like to champion and fight for. I want to make it easier for employers to be able to take on those apprenticeship schemes. Often the colleges are really happy to do the bulk of the paperwork, but there's still a bit of a bureaucratic burden on employers. And I went round some small businesses, a precision engineering firm over in Offerton, and their main concern was, I want more apprentices, but I don't have the time or the space to be able to do all the paperwork required to do it. And so that's something that I personally want to get involved in, as well as supporting the rollout of them. On the national service side, I want to be very clear about it, what it is, and I think it's been really, really bad form from other parties to be scaremongering over national service. I was an infantry officer, and no point have we suggested that we are going to be forcing 18-year-olds to join the infantry and go to war. That is categorically untrue. 95% of the national service programme is not going to be military. 5% is, and 5% is military, and also some sort of it could also be cyber defence as well, which might not be in uniform but is there. And the areas that it's going to focus on are procurement, it's logistics, it's cyber, it's things that is going to make them more employable. It is something that is replicated across Europe, especially the Scandinavian countries. They've had this sort of thing for a while. And so the expectation is the approximately 30,000 18-year-olds a year who would take up the military aspect of it, it would be competitive. It would be people volunteering to do this. Rather than sign up for the 4 years in the army, you're getting 12 months worth of military experience in some form in an area that is going to make you significantly more employable when you leave. Because if you do get a grounding in procurement for 12 months, your employability in the private sector is greatly increased. The other 95% is all about broadening civic opportunities and community opportunities. It's going and spending a day a month serving with the RL, a weekend a month serving the RLNI. It's going to work alongside some NHS emergency responders. It is getting people back involved in the community. I think what we saw, that especially with the post-COVID and probably with the rise of social media as well, is a lot of younger people are becoming significantly more isolated from their communities, and this is an opportunity to try and get them back involved. So yes, it's mandatory, but equally we've said we will introduce a Royal Commission. So what we haven't said is, we're elected, this is happening the next day, we're saying a Royal Commission is going to look at it and going to look at the circumstances. What are the reasons that you can not take it up? You know what I mean? Like, is one of the when I say get out clauses, that's not the word I'm looking for. I can't think of I've lost the ability to think of the word at the moment, but the things that might allow you to not take part in it, for example, the Royal Commission will look at that. Exactly how it's going to be rolled out, the Royal Commission will look at that. Exemptions, that was the word. What exemptions might be in place? All of those things. So that would, and with the intent being that we implement the national service over the course of the Parliament. So for those who think that when they hear national service, we're going back to the 1950s of congratulations, you're in the army, you're off to Singapore, that is categorically not the case. And so I do support it. And I support it because it is getting our younger people reintegrated into society. And I think that's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll answer it in several phases there. The first one is we have introduced a long-term workforce plan for the NHS for the first time. And what that is doing is that's setting out a strategy where we're trying to reduce the reliance on overseas workers on the NHS and trying to encourage British people to get into the sector. So at the moment, I think it's about 25%, and I might not be quite bob on with my my figures there, but I think it's about 25% are made up of overseas workers, and we want to try and reduce that down to 10%, not by cutting the numbers, but by increasing the number of British people working in the NHS. That's the first part of that. Second part is the legal cap on migration. It comes alongside a points-based system of bringing people over that work to fill gaps in the employment market. That is the whole principle of it. And it is also things like cutting down the ability to bring, which we have already done, but if you're coming for a PhD, you can't bring 18 members of your family. I'm exaggerating for effect, but that side of things is also that. On the illegal migration side, something absolutely has to be done, not only from a reducing immigration perspective, but also from a moral perspective, because people dying in the Channel is wholly unacceptable. And equally, I think the Liberal Democrat manifesto is the way to solve the immigration problem is speed up asylum process and make them more legal. Right? That to me is not a workable solution. And I will tell it. It's an anecdote. It's a specific thing. But when I was based overseas, British territory, but overseas, and this is 2015-16. People, 2 boatloads of migrants landed on UK sovereign territory where we were. There was around 140 of them. 100 of them were accepted into the asylum system, either into the EU, into the UK, or elsewhere. 40 of them were either unidentifiable or on Interpol's list for links to international crime or international terrorism. And so there is absolutely a risk there. And there is the reason that processing takes a while, and the reason this claim of we'll just speed the entire thing up, I categorically don't agree with, is because you need to identify who is a genuine asylum seeker that needs the support, which we should give to them, and who is there for nefarious reasons. And when 40 out of 140, almost a third, yes, I get it's anecdotal, it's my personal experience, but that is something that is absolutely concerning to me. And so something must be done, because not only can we not allow that to happen in terms of letting in international criminals or terrorists, but equally, I do not want children dying in the Channel. Absolutely, and I'm glad that I got my facts right earlier, because I said 92 and 28,000. Well, there's a few things that we're doing. One is, there's an entire a separate costing document which shows that all our plans are costed to be able to support that. I'm doing this from memory, but I think it's 500,000, a reduction of 500,000 of administrative staff within the NHS, and I think everyone would agree that there is an overly bureaucratic nature to the NHS that can be resolved. And for me, it is absolutely about focusing the investment in the NHS on the clinical side of the NHS, not on the administrative side of the NHS. And probably by accident rather than by design, we've got to a position where that element of the NHS ballooned. And so one way to reduce that is actually to reduce the amount of NHS managers to try and focus it there. No, because the economic growth assumptions that are sort of alluded to there have been supported. So on average, we've brought in an extra 6 billion from reducing tax evasion, and we have part of our costings is forecasting out the fact that we're going to be able to continue doing that, and that was assessed as a absolutely reasonable assumption to make by the head of the National Audit Office. Because this idea that why only doing it now? Well, no. The whole point of tax avoidance and tax evasion is people find new ways around it, right? You close one new loophole, someone tries to find another one. So it's not a one-off, it's a constant cycle. And so one of the elements we're doing is focusing on that. The other element is reforming welfare, targeting at those who need it the most and getting more people back into employment and back into work. And that is something that we absolutely have to do and is absolutely achievable. Well, that's a very politically charged question, I must say. Look, I haven't always agreed with the Conservative government. I understand people's frustrations. On the COVID side of things, not everything was perfect. I absolutely abided by the rules. I was in the army during COVID, and my focus was deploying people on COVID support forces. Getting soldiers around. I was sat at the brigade headquarters, so our role was organising and deploying people out to go and support either the vaccine rollout or initially all the testing, etc. If you remember those days when British Army soldiers were stood with a swab and a mask, getting some very quick training to be able to do it. That was entirely my focus during COVID. There was absolutely a requirement to break the civil service conditions of how you procure things. The civil service is incredibly bureaucratic and slow at procuring things, and so procuring things of pace meant that you had to take a bit of a risk there. And did some people play the system in order to get a dodgy contract? Absolutely. I'm not defending that, but what I am defending is any government would have had to make similar decisions and been able to do that. And actually, I think there's a phrase in the army that no plan survives contact with the enemy. No matter how well prepared we were before COVID, it would have been an issue, and every government would have struggled. And actually, I think the rollout of the vaccine was fantastic. I think the support we gave to people throughout the furlough scheme, the small business loans, etc., kept people afloat. And when I go around the constituency, I went to small businesses in Woodley Precinct, in Romley Forum. They're still here today because of the support that they got as small businesses, and there are people still in employment today because of the support they got from the furlough scheme. So there were absolutely things that I am proud of the past and current Conservative government, but there are also things that I didn't agree with and don't agree with. What I think is Rishi Sunak is turning a corner in the economy, and actually the most important thing for people today is, inflation's at 2% today. It is bringing inflation down, it's growing the economy, and whatever you think of Rishi Sunak, it is undeniable that he's a numbers guy. He understands the economy, he understands what he's doing, and I support him in getting that on track. I'm not trying to get into Parliament to just follow blindly the will of the Conservative Party. I'm going into Parliament to support the people of Hazel Grove. I'm a Conservative because they're the values I have, but actually I'm going to represent the people here, not to, I want to be Hazel Grove's man in Westminster, not Westminster's man in Hazel Grove. So I don't think it is. I think there wasn't, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't as many MPs who stood down this election as stood down in 1997, from memory. But you also have to look at the context of this Parliament. So if you were an MP elected in 2001, 2005, 2010, and in 2015 you think to yourself, I've got one more Parliament in me. And then there's election in 2017. So you go, well, I'm only 2 years in, I'll do another one. And then there's election in 2019. So you say, well, you know what, I'll do another one. And then you have the 5-year Parliament, which had COVID in the middle of it. You had a war in Ukraine in the middle of it. It's been an incredibly difficult time for everyone. And I think some people just hit the end of what felt like a 9-year Parliament and said, well, actually, I've had enough. And it might have been 9 years, but for some it could have been 29 years. It could have been 30 years. And people just naturally come to their time. There are more Conservative MPs stepping down than Labour MPs because the Conservative Party's the largest party. So there are more to stand down if they wanted to. So I don't think it is a reflection of what's happening. But ultimately, for me, actually, it's given me the opportunity to be able to serve again. And what I want to do is serve the people of Hazel Grove. I've served my country in the military, and now I want to serve and represent the people of Hazel Grove in the mother of all democracies in Parliament. Well, firstly, can I just say thank you very much to Darren and David and Kiki's Marple for inviting me down here. It's been a pleasure. I didn't sample a cocktail so that I'd be focused when answering questions. I was worried that they were going to try and trick me into slurring my words near the end. I'm going to repeat what I sort of said at the start, which is on the 5th of July, there's going to be a truce of who governs the country. And whilst I fear a Labour majority, I also fear a Labour supermajority. And in Hazel Grove constituency, the only way to vote to avoid that is to vote Conservative. And I hope that people have listened to this and seen that I'm a genuine person. I'm not a party apparatchik. I'm not a career politician. As I've said, I've spent my career in the army, and what I really want to do is just stand up for the people of Hazel Grove, stand up for their values. And there is nothing more important than integrity. And one of the questions sort of alluded to it, how do you bring integrity back into politics? Well, it starts at home, and it starts by having an MP who puts integrity front and centre of what they want to do. And for me, that's what it is. And so if people have listened to me talking today and think, actually, I quite like what he's saying, I quite like him as a person, then please vote for Paul Athans, vote Conservative on the 4th of July.